Hello, this is Kyle Heisland. I have Lisa Percival with me, and we're going to talk about procurement. And at the end, we're going to talk about procuring with for USDA commodities. Please, if you have questions, you can ask them anytime during the in the chat box. You can submit those, and we will get to them as soon as we can, or we will have time at the end to go through some of them if we have any common questions going on there. Today, I would like to talk about what is procurement, the different levels of procurement, and how to go through the procurement process. I will talk about what contracts should look like and how to manage those contracts. Generally, the term procurement refers to purchasing of goods and services. Procurement is an important part of operating the child nutrition program because federal dollars are being used to purchase goods and services. Therefore, LEAs need to understand and comply with local, state, and federal procurement guidelines to make sure the federal dollars are spent wisely. In large part, the procurement rules were put in place to correct discrepancies in the process such as nepotism, improper awards, kickbacks, incentives, and other improper practices when purchasing goods and services. Competition is always important. Competition is the basis for the overarching regulations. Accurately achieving full and open competition in all procurement activities must be achieved. Competition in the procurement process is important because of the belief that all capable contractors who want to do business with federal government should be eligible to do so. Competition also prevents offering contracts to relatives, friends, etc., without any regard for whether doing so was the most advantageous, the most responsive, and the lowest cost. This is what happens when the opportunity for business is not full and open, equal, transparent, or has integrity. No presentation on procurement methods would be complete without discussion of competition killers. When conducting competitive procedures, these procedures must not place unreasonable requirements on firms, require unnecessary experience, give competitive awards to consultants or vendors, have organizational conflicts of interest, specify brand name products only, make arbitrary decisions on the procurement process, write bid specifications that are too narrow and limit competition, allow potential contractors to write or otherwise influence bid specifications, or provide insufficient time for the vendors to submit bids. Use logo as a product specification. The use of any of these procedures restricts competition rather than achieving competition, the goal of all competitive procedures. Procurement is not just the solicitation and awarding of a contract that ends the procurement. It's a multi-step process. Define the procedures you plan for the procurement process ensures that LEA procurement procedures are all well thought out, reflect the needs, and are completed properly in compliance with regulations, and in the end are managed properly at the contract award level. You must also forecast or plan ahead for the goods and services that you will need for the school year. You will choose the proper procurement method according to the school's procurement thresholds. Don't always go with the state and federal thresholds as they may not be specific to your district. Develop a solicitation is how you communicate your wants and needs to potential vendors. Take your time in developing this so that you have clear description of your needs and expectations. Advertising your solicitations has a direct impact on the level of competition for your business. The stronger your advertisement, the more chance there is of businesses to see it and compete for your business. Evaluating the proposals and offers is a crucial step in making sure that you are getting what you want and need. Read these carefully and take everything presented into consideration. This is not something that should be done by one individual, but preferably multiple people. Awarding the contract, selecting the most responsive and responsible bidder. Even though a contract has been awarded and your goods and services have been selected, this does not mean the procurement process is complete. Managing the contract is the last step. Throughout the school year, you will need to continually manage the contract to ensure that goods and services are meeting the prices, specifications, and expectations indicated on the awarded contract. If a vendor fails to meet detailed outline in the contract, this could be grounds for termination of the contract, or at the very least, reason to choose a different vendor in the next school year. Keeping in mind achieving full and open competition is a goal for every procurement transaction. Procurement procedures identify how your procurement process is carried out, thresholds specific to your district, as well as your code of conduct. The code of conduct outline the rules and proper practices of the individuals conducting the procurement process. These rules and proper practices should clearly avoid any conflicts of interest, as conflicts of interest can be detrimental to competition in the procurement process. Help to prevent conflicts of interest, use of non-competitive practices, and protests that delay the contract award, or worse, require the solicitation process to be terminated, rewritten, and reissued. When you're forecasting, you're planning and evaluating to determine the future food service operation needs. You will want to take into consideration the following things. The central kitchen. Operating your kitchen versus contracting with a food service management company will have a huge impact on what you will need to procure over the course of the school year. FSMCs will conduct most of the procurement and ordering for your facility. You will need to conduct a procurement for selecting your FSMC if you choose to do so. Make sure you have the space for your deliveries according to your storage facilities. Ensure that deliveries will be made at a time that is convenient for you and your staff. This should be outlined in your contract. If you can't dedicate the time and staff at a certain time, make sure you specify this in the contract prior to the award. Make sure to always consider your budget and staff capabilities. Use prior year menus as a guideline as to what you will be ordering for the next school years. You can also request a velocity report from your distributor if you would like a list of all the products you ordered in the previous school year. Modify this list to include or exclude any products that you may want or don't want in the next school year. Keep in mind your inventory levels. If you have a lot of something left over from the last school year or ran out of something frequently, adjust your order amounts going forward to better suit your needs. The procurement process requires time, so beginning without a clear picture of what you want and need can have a big impact on the price and quality if you agree to when awarding the contract. The less time you give yourself, the less time vendors have to compete for your business. The more competition, the better the outcome for you and your school. This slide demonstrates how the value of the procurement corresponds to the procurement thresholds. The small purchase threshold for state and federal is $250,000. When the value of the purchase is estimated at less than or equal to $250,000, informal methods, including micro purchase and small purchase, may be followed. However, when the value of the purchase is estimated at a greater than $250,000, formal procedures, including sealed bids and competitive proposals, apply. In your school-specific procurement plan, your LEA may have more restrictive guidelines. For example, if your LEA's micro purchase threshold is $5,000, you must adhere to that threshold when procuring products and services. This flowchart is intended to show the components of a procurement plan and how all the procurement procedures work together. The planning involves forecasting or estimating the value of the purchase and available revenues and payments. Once the value of the revenues is estimated, the proper procurement method can be used. Micro purchase threshold under $10,000, informal procedures $10,000 to $250,000, Formal procedures, anything above $250,000. We'll go through this a lot more in the rest of the presentation. Small purchase procedures are those that are relatively simple and informal procurement methods for securing services and supplies or other property that does not cost more than the simplified acquisition threshold. When determining the procurement threshold to use for all LEAs, must use the most restrictive threshold between the local, state, and federal. The current federal threshold for purchases is $250,000. The state of Missouri threshold is also $250,000. So if your LEA procurement procedure follows the federal thresholds for purchases over $250,000, then purchases over $250,000, you will need to use the formal procurement procedures. If your school district, if your school district's local small purchase threshold is $10,000, then the threshold is the most restrictive. You must go with the most restrictive small purchase threshold. Therefore, any purchases over $10,000 would follow the formal procurement process. The threshold applies to a single transaction for a 1-year period. The USDA requires that LEA purchase to the maximum extent practicable domestic commodities or products. This can be accomplished by the LEAs, including the Buy American provision and solicitation, contracts, and product specifications. This is a great one-page front and back document that explains the Buy American requirement. The back of the page goes through the process to determine if and how to use the Buy American provision. This is also on our website. You can download and print if you wish. Remember to retain all documentation, regardless of the procurement method used. All purchase must be documented and retained. For the micro purchase, you want to keep all purchase orders and sales receipts. Informal, this requires less documentation than formal procurement, but documentation must still be kept. Make sure you keep all solicitations and obtain quotes, whether this be via phone, email, fax, etc. And just like with the micro purchases, keep all the invoices, purchase orders, and sales receipts. Formal is the most detailed and documented procurement method. For this process, you will need to keep all the documentation previously mentioned for the informal procurement, as well as any explanation as to why the vendor was selected. Retain all documentation from all bids. You need to show fair competition, so you need to keep the documentation for winning and losing bids. Now let's talk in more depth about micro purchasing. To the extent practicable, micro purchases must be distributed equitably among qualified suppliers and may be awarded without soliciting competitive price quotes as long as the price is considered reasonable by the entity doing the purchase. Even though you are not required to obtain price quotes for goods and services, micro purchases, this does not mean that the competition should not take place. Competition for micro purchases may be awarded without solicitation, as I said before, as long as the price is reasonable. You must distribute the micro purchases equitably among qualified suppliers. You purchase from various suppliers at the same time as long as the total purchases don't exceed the micro purchase threshold. And if you choose one supplier for the purchase and another supplier the next time to purchase, the purchases need to be made. If the price is unreasonable, purchase it elsewhere. If prices are comparable and reasonable, purchase from multiple vendors over the same time. Now let's talk about informal small purchases. Your informal procurement threshold must be put in your procurement plan and cannot be more than the federal or state threshold. Procuring services, supplies, and other property that does not cost more than the restrictive formal threshold. LEAs have a lot more flexibility in how they solicit bids from vendors. This is much simpler. Procuring services, supplies, or other property that does not cost more than the formal. If the small purchase procedures are used, price or rate quotations must be obtained from adequate number of qualified sources. At least two, we prefer three sources. When the purchase price has been estimated to fall within the applicable small purchase threshold, written specifications must be developed, and the SFA obtains quotes from at least two responsible and responsive bidders. While informal procurement procedures are less rigorous than formal procurement procedures, the procedures must be documented. Let's talk about how to go through the informal procurement process, small procurement process. Best practices before you begin the bid process. Talk to vendors, see what they offer, and who you should contact if you are interested. Keep in mind that just because you like one vendor's product, this does not mean that you simply choose that vendor without allowing competition. However, you can take your experience with that vendor into consideration when evaluating the bids and proposals, which leads to building relationships with vendors. Just because you have only ever went with one vendor, that does not mean that this vendor should automatically be awarded the contract. Competition is key to the best price and quality. However, as I mentioned before, if you have good experience and relationship with the vendor, this can be taken into consideration when selecting the vendor. Talk to other schools and get recommendation and get their opinions about potential vendors you may be considering. Now that you have planned ahead and decided what products and services you would like to look at for the next year, we must begin the planning process for your procurement. You will do this by your scope of work. Will products and services be delivered to one or multiple sites? Is this the one-time purchase or purchases during a specified period? You will also want to talk about contract renewal options, including terms and conditions and price adjustments if applicable during the contract period. Now that we have planned ahead, we are prepared to know what we want and need, we can begin the solicitation process. During the solicitation process, you contact vendors however you choose, but keep in mind that you need to provide all vendors with the same language and wording. Even slight variations in how you phrase things can lead to different interpretations by the vendors. Because of this, verbal communication is not recommended, but it is still allowed. The best way to verbally communicate your solicitation is to type up the solicitation and read it to each vendor. This way, all vendors receive the same information. You must provide the exact same language to each vendor to ensure consistent communication with all vendors. Now that everybody has been contacted, we need to evaluate the vendor responses that we have received. When you document your vendor responses, write down in your purchase log or other journal the name of the district official making the solicitation, the vendor name, your contact method via phone, email, or fax, name of person providing the price quote, the price quoted, the date price quote was obtained, and the duration of the price quote. I'll show an example of this documentation called an informal purchase log in a few slides. Obtain price quotes from at least two vendors. Typically within the informal procurement, the main factor is price. Therefore, the evaluation process is much simpler. The most responsive and responsible bidder with the lowest price will be awarded the contract. This is the informal purchase log. This shows the documentation needed for an informal purchase. In this example, they got information from 3 different vendors. This shows who they spoke with, prices given for each product, and everything you need for the documentation. Which brings us to our next step, awarding the contract. Simply having documentation showing multiple bids and specifications of goods and services is not enough. You need to develop and award a contract to the vendor with the specific terms and conditions listed in the solicitation, so everyone is on the same page as to what and how the purchases will proceed. Now that we have gone through the whole informal procurement process, we have selected and awarded the contract. We are done, right? No. Even though you procured your products and or services, you still need to manage a contract or monitor the invoices of in products. We were conducting procurement reviews. We actually run into several discrepancies between the prices indicated on the awarded contract and the actual price that the school is being charged. Make sure you're checking everything and if there are any issues, bring that up with the vendor. You want to make sure you're getting what you're paying for and paying the price that was agreed upon. If the product comes in and it's not what you ordered or is damaged, reject it. It's the vendor's responsibility to give you satisfactory products. Don't pay for things that are unacceptable. Now let's talk about the formal procurement process. Much like the informal procurement process, the formal process has several steps that must be followed. The formal procurement methods are when the value of the purchase is expected to exceed the simplified acquisition threshold, the $250,000. These are more rigorous and prescriptive, and they come in as competitive sealed bids and competitive proposals. Before we select one of the method, regulations include a requirement that a cost analysis be conducted. This is conducted so that the methods, informal or formal, may be determined and for the purpose of selecting the contract type that will result. These will be discussed in later slides. The program operators must perform a cost or price analysis in connection with every procurement action in the excess of the simplified acquisition threshold, including contract modifications. The method and degree of analysis is dependent on the facts surrounding the particular procurement situation. But as a starting point, the non-federal entity must take independent estimates before receiving bids or proposals. This means every procurement estimated over 250,000, including contract modifications, must include a cost estimate. How does this occur? The good news is that prior year cost records can be used to show the value of the purchases for these products or services. These can be documented in the procurement activity by including it in the scope, a statement of something like, in the prior year, the program spent X dollars for goods and services identified in this solicitation. Use your prior year procurement and financial records to determine the value and include it in the new solicitation. Competitive sealed bidding procedures used as an invitation for bid, or IFB. These are publicly solicited and a firm fixed price contract is awarded. There may be one contract awarded for most responsive and responsible bidder using a lump sum or bottom price based on price, or multiple awards may be given if the evaluation and award provisions in the solicitation state awards to multiple bidders will be based on unit price by items or group of items. An invitation for bid is an invitation to vendors to submit bids on a requested service or product that you will need over a specified period of time. When you use this, when you complete the specifications or descriptions of the product or the service are available or can be easily developed by the LEA. Responsive bids differ only in price. More than one qualified source is thought to be willing and able to compete for the award. An example for use of IFB would be for napkins. There should be no difference other than cost if you write specific bid on napkins. This procurement leads itself to a firm fixed price contract, and the selection of the successful bidder can be made principally on the basis of price. What are some components of competitive sealed bidding? If sealed bids are used, the following requirements must apply. The bids must be solicited from adequate number of known suppliers, providing them sufficient response time prior to the date set for opening the bids for state, local, and the invitation for bids must be publicly advertised. Now let's look at the competitive proposals. Competitive proposals uses the request for proposal, RFP, which describes how technical and cost factors will be considered in making the final determination for the purchase of goods and services. These result in the award of either a fixed price contract or a cost reimbursable contract. Competitive proposals or competitive negotiations is appropriate when procurement cannot be adequately described or the scope of the services cannot be clearly defined. An RFP has the following criteria. State what is needed using clear, thorough specifications without being overly restrictive. Specify the expected terms and conditions of the contract. Provide information to the vendor that must include in their proposals as to how they plan to provide the requested service. Identify each factor the LEA will use to evaluate the proposal and award the contract. Describe how the factors will be considered in making the final determination. This is importance or weight of each factor in the award of the contract. State that the award will be made based on price and other factors to the responsive and responsible bidder whose response is most advantageous to the LEA after the price and other factors have been determined. Let's look now at the process for soliciting using competitive proposals. Requests for proposals must be publicized and identify all evaluation factors at their relative importance. Any response to publicized requests for proposals must be considered to the maximum extent practicable. In the formal procurement process, you follow the first two steps of the informal procurement process, the pre-bid procedures and planning procurement, and begin to develop your solicitation. Once the decision is made regarding what goods and services are needed and the appropriate method to acquire them, a solicitation must be developed which contains specifications and all necessary contract elements. Elements of the solicitation are general information. This is the best opportunity to clearly define your expectations on the business, disputes, inventory, invoicing, products, substitutes, if you're allowing those, items unique to the contract. Check with your district for the minimum requirements necessary for your solicitation documents. A good practice is to contact neighboring school district for samples on their solicitation documents. Information about the district. You want to include the school nutrition programs, approximate date they are operated, approximate number of annual meals served, copy of a cycle menu, number of schools, a just brief description of the staff. Then you want to know the contract type. It is important to identify the type of procurement and resulting contract. Is it going to be a fixed fee or fixed price contract? General description of goods and services. The general description of goods and services to be required may include general products or services such as frozen entrees, canned fruits or vegetables, and paper good. Clear and concise specification describes the required characteristics of the goods and services. When a known name brand or product is used as the quality standard, regulations require the solicitation documents state brand name or pre-approved equal. It is also important to identify any restrictions such as delivery times and frequencies, dates, requirements for delivery, dollar value for each delivery drop and type of storage available. The procedural issues we'll cover later as far and the technical requirements. The more communication on specifically what is wanted and expected, the smoother the process. Here are some examples of specifics you want to put in your RFP. First, you develop a solicitation, then you must publicly announce it. The solicitation announcement must contain sufficient content and the scope to allow bidders to identify the general nature of the goods and services to be procured, the type of contract awarded, how more information can be obtained, the due dates for responses to the solicitation, evaluation and scoring criteria to determine contract award, contract type to be awarded, and how long that contract is going to last. When advertising for procurement, you must keep in mind the complexity of the solicitation requirements and the time that it will take them to gather the information for their pricing. Federally, for a food service management company, you must allow 21 days before the solicitation is due. They prefer 4 to 6 weeks. When you advertise, you can do this in a variety of newspapers, trade periodicals, websites, direct mailings, or other print media that businesses and the general public would have access to. Next, you must evaluate the bids using the established criteria. Prior to advertising the bid, you must know how you plan to evaluate it. When evaluating bids, you must identify the evaluation criteria in the bid. You must show the point system for the evaluation and describe the scoring process. You must also specify a minimum technical score that you consider acceptable, and then let the bidders know how they will be identified if they won or lost the bid. You can also add geographic preference to your bid. This helps you procure locally grown and raised products in your school. When you do this, you will incorporate the geographic preference. You define local. Your school district will do that. You define what type of procurement method you're going to use. You will decide how much preference the local products and services will receive, and be sure your solicitation is perfectly clear on how the preference will be applied. Here's an example of how you can incorporate preference points into a solicitation. Here an IFB is used for apples and states that the apples were grown within 100 miles of the school. This is a clear solicitation, and as stated above, any responder knows they will get 10 preference points, or in this case, or in this example, a 10-cent reduction in price for the lowest bid. This slide shows the solicitation for apples. Here, Owens Orchard sent in their bid at $1.97, Apple Lane Farms $2.05, Bob's Best at $2.03. As you can see, only Apple Lane Farms meet the geographic preference, so 10 cents is knocked off the price with preference points, so Apple Lane Farm would win the bid. The school would still pay the $2.05 price for the apples. The $1.95 is just used for the solicitation process. Geographic preference can also be used in RFPs. Since RFPs aren't driven strictly by price, you can use additional factors such as technical requirements, marketing, showing how the state or farm of origin in the invoice, and if your school will be allowed to make farm visits for educational value. Here we have consideration for price and quality, delivery and packaging and references. Here they also get points for classroom visits to the farm, providing the state of origin and all products in the state source produce. Here's an example of an evaluation of a solicitation. Price must be the major component of the evaluation, but as you can see, specifications, service and delivery, geographic preference, and other factors can be used in the evaluation as well. Next, we must determine the most responsive and responsible bidder at the lowest price. The responsive bidder is a vendor whose products or services meet the LEA specification. A responsible vendor is a vendor that can and will successfully fulfill the terms and conditions of the proposed procurement. To determine if a contractor is responsible, you should investigate the contractor's integrity, compliance with public policy, past performance, and financial and technical resources. If you determine the contractor is not responsible, you must document your decision and why you consider them not responsible, and the contractor becomes ineligible for the award. When you award the contract, this legally ensures commitment by both parties and provides a record of the deal. It also fulfills numerous federal regulations. After awarding the contract, you must manage the contract. Managing the contract, the LEA must monitor the contractor's performance and make sure they are receiving the quality and quantity of the goods and services requested, that they receive those goods and services on time, and the prices charged are correct. Here's a basic timeline for procurement activities. October through January, you can establish a product list and do preliminary work such as forecasting and student surveys. October through January, you can establish that. Oh, I already said that one. February through March, you develop bid specifications. Here you get the bid package together and get ready for distribution. April, you release a solicitation and publicly advertise. You could also conduct a pre-bid meeting if you want to. May, you conduct the opening of the bids and analyze the bids. June, you make the bid award and recommendations and you award the contract. July is the beginning of the contract period. We have been talking about procurement for a long time now and getting in more into the weeds each time. We will discuss where the USDA foods fit into procurement, address how oversight differs amongst the various type of procurements involving USDA food, net off invoice, and fee for service. Specifically today, during our time together, we'll be diving into the weeds of procuring processed end products using your federal dollars. At the compliance level, the USDA was taken out of the administrative review and put into the procurement review. So here's where I'm going to go through some questions with you. The DESE School District would like to process its USDA food bulk chicken into flaming hot chicken tenders. If it uses an approved processor through the state processing agreement, does it have to be competitively procured? The answer is yes. Federal dollars spent on further processing USDA foods must always be competitively procured. Remember, the state and national processing agreements are only agreements and do not replace the requirement for LEAs to competitively procure. Another question we get is the LEA required to procure brown box items? Now let's dive a little deeper into what are you required to procure. Brown box items are procured at the national level. All USDA foods that are further processed through the selected value pass-through NOI, or FFS must be procured at the LEA level. Schools will complete the procurement process based on the aggregate dollars spent per vendor and according to the required purchase method. Here we have ABC School District would like to process its USDA donated foods, cheese, into pizza. The district develops a solicitation, then solicits and documents prices from three processors on the food distribution USDA food packet. Does this meet the regulatory requirement for free and open competition? Yes, it does, as long as it is under the small purchase threshold. If it is over $250,000, no. If the proposed amount were estimated to be over $250,000, then the LEA would be required to do formal procurement. Then contacting three processors on the list would be adequate to meet the procurement requirements. What is important here is the best practice for forecasting. In this chart, you'll see steps involved with the cost of food processed in product. The steps include the total product cost plus value of USDA food equals the true cost of processed end product. The LEA is responsible for the procurement of the ingredients to make the end product, shipping and final delivery, storage, and any administrative cost. The total product cost includes ingredients to make the end product, shipping, storage, final delivery, and administrative cost, as I said. Procurement is required by the LEA for both FFS and NOI. The most common value pass-through method is fee-for-service. The indirect discount system known as NOI. In this system, the end products are sold to a distributor at a commercial price. The product then becomes USDA food case when eligible participant buys the commercial product reduced by the donated food. No matter the value of the pass-through method, the LEA must procure a price for a processor, cost of ingredients, labor, packaging, overhead, and other costs from the actual conversion of the donated food into the desired end product. It primarily applies to meat and poultry or other non-substitutable donated foods. The donated food value credit is included in the final price. Here we show the method of sale. We show the pass-through system, the net off invoice, and fee for service. You will see the schools where they have to from, the pass-through, and how the pass-through is performed. When evaluating the prices of end products for a fee for service, you'll want to look at the written specifications of the cheese pizza. You will go through the three processors. You will look at the processing fee, the value of donated foods for production, the total cost, your servings per case, and you will get the dollar per serving. Processor B has the lowest price per serving in this example at $13.6 per serving. Here's the example of evaluating prices for end products using fee for service. Again, you have your three processors. You'll look at the processing fee, the value of the donated food, total cost, your servings per case, and your dollar per serving. Here, processor B again has the lowest price per serving in this example. Oh, here we are evaluating the price for net off invoice. Here we have our three distributors. We have our commercial price, our discounted food price, our net price, servings per case, and then you get a dollar per serving. Again, distributor B has the lowest price for serving in this example. Here we wanted to put up a timeline for donated foods, for the procurement of donated foods. In this, from August to October, you want to update your procurement plan and include any forecasted purchasing for the upcoming school year, including commercial products and donated foods. November, your donated food values are released from USDA. You write product specifications and develop bid documents. December, you obtain quotes, solicit bids for the formal, publish your RFP. In January to March, you're going to evaluate those quotes and bids, award contracts, and provide DESE an estimate for the donated food required for diversion. March and April, DESE Food Distribution orders full truckloads of donated food for pre-order and fill the banks. January through June, schools communicate with brokers, processors, and distributors to finalize bids, agreements, and contracts. July, you use letter to monitor how well entitlement was used for the previous school year. And ongoing, you're going to want to monitor your invoices from distributors and processors for the value of the pass-through. Here we wanted to put in a slide for the procurement process and the procurement website for the state. Now, if you have any questions, please fill them out or please enter them into the chat box and Lisa and I will go through them. I want to come up to this slide as well. If you have any questions after we stop this program, feel free to email us or call us directly and we will get back to you as soon as we can with the answer you need. Now I'm going to mute and we will take questions as they come in.
Okay. We have, hold on, let's mute. Okay. Well, it sounds like it's going to echo. We don't want Kyle echo. I think it's the speaker. I'll let you read it. That way we don't echo.
Okay, so I have a question from someone. Are we required to include in an RFP the evaluation portion that preference is given for women and minority-owned businesses? Yes, that is still a requirement, and that is also a requirement in your contracts that you can show that you have done that if it is applicable. I don't see any further questions on here. Please email or call us if you have any additional questions from this presentation. We are going to shut it down now, and we will talk to you all later. Have a great day. Bye-bye.